November 3rd, 1944. Dawn. Hürtgen Forest, Germany. The temperature hovered just above freezing as a cold rain turned the forest floor into freezing mud. Through the pre-dawn darkness, Private First Class Thomas Everett Harper of the 28th Infantry Division, 2nd Battalion, Company E, carefully unwrapped a standard-issue military prophylactic from its paper packaging. His hands, though cold, moved with practiced precision as he stretched the latex over the muzzle of his M1903 Springfield rifle, securing it with a rubber band just behind the front sight. The condom formed a perfect waterproof seal over the barrel's opening, transparent enough to see through, elastic enough to allow a bullet to pass without resistance. Staff Sergeant Robert Mitchell, huddled in a foxhole 20 yards away, watched this ritual with barely concealed contempt. "Harper, you planning to fuck the Germans to death, or are you going to shoot them?" His voice carried through the morning mist, loud enough for the entire platoon to hear. Laughter rippled through the American positions, nervous laughter from men who hadn't slept in 36 hours. Harper didn't respond. He'd heard the jokes before. For 3 weeks since arriving at the Hürtgen Forest, he'd endured mockery from nearly every man in his company. They called him Rubber Man, the Trojan soldier, and worse. Some questioned his manhood. Others suggested he didn't understand what prophylactics were actually for. But Thomas Harper, a former hunting guide from the Appalachian Mountains of West Virginia, understood something his fellow soldiers didn't. He understood that moisture was a rifle's greatest enemy, that a single drop of water in a barrel could cause catastrophic pressure buildup when firing, that mud, snow, or rain could reduce accuracy by 50%, or render a weapon completely useless. What none of them knew, what they would discover over the next 12 hours, was that Harper's unorthodox modification would enable him to achieve something that would be studied in military academies for generations. In a single day, operating in conditions that rendered most weapons ineffective, Thomas Harper would kill 48 German soldiers with 49 shots. The story of how a 5-cent piece of latex rubber transformed one man into a killing machine and eventually changed U.S. military doctrine forever begins not with mockery, but with mud. The Hürtgen Forest Offensive, launched September 12, 1944, had become a nightmare of attrition warfare. 50 square miles of dense evergreen forest straddling the German-Belgian border had consumed American divisions like a meat grinder. The U.S. First Army had committed over 120,000 men to capturing this strategically vital terrain that controlled approaches to the Roer River dams. But the forest itself was the enemy. Trees so dense that visibility rarely exceeded 50 yards. Terrain so broken that tanks couldn't maneuver. And most crucially for this story, weather conditions that turned every weapon into a potential malfunction waiting to happen. From mid-October through December, the Hürtgen Forest experienced near constant precipitation. Rain, sleet, snow, and freezing fog created moisture levels that exceeded 95% humidity. Every exposed metal surface rusted overnight. Every weapon collected condensation that froze in barrels, jammed actions, and corroded firing mechanisms. The 28th Infantry Division's armory reports from November 1944 documented catastrophic weapon failure rates. Of the division's approximately 13,000 rifles, an estimated 40% experienced malfunctions during the first week of November. Mud in barrels caused burst chambers. Ice and gas tubes prevented semi-automatic rifles from cycling. Moisture in ammunition caused misfires at rates exceeding 20%. In Company E's sector, the situation was particularly dire. The company had been assigned to hold a defensive position along a ridgeline designated Hill 204, a nondescript piece of high ground that overlooked a crucial supply route. German forces, primarily elements of the 275th Infantry Division, held positions approximately 400 to 800 yards distant across a narrow valley. The tactical situation created what military analysts would later call a sniper's paradise. Long sight lines across the valley, limited cover on both sides, and static positions that allowed patient marksmen to identify patterns and predict movements. But the weather conditions meant that most riflemen couldn't exploit these advantages. Their weapons simply wouldn't function reliably in the constant moisture. Thomas Harper had recognized this problem on his second day in the forest. A farm boy who'd grown up hunting in the wettest regions of West Virginia, he'd learned from his grandfather that moisture in a barrel was death to accuracy. His grandfather, a veteran of the First World War, had taught him tricks that weren't in any Army manual. The prophylactic solution had occurred to Harper during a supply distribution on October 15th. The Army issued condoms regularly to prevent venereal disease, and Harper received his standard monthly allotment of 12. Looking at the thin latex, he'd remembered his grandfather telling him about using oilcloth to cover muzzles during rain. His first experiment was crude. He simply stretched a condom over his rifle barrel and test-fired into a dirt bank. The bullet passed through the latex without any deviation he could measure. The barrel remained completely dry inside. When he removed the condom after firing, the barrel showed no moisture, no condensation, nothing but the normal powder residue from firing. Over the next 2 weeks, Harper refined his technique. He discovered that securing the condom with a rubber band prevented it from slipping, but didn't interfere with bullet trajectory. He learned that one condom could survive multiple shots before needing replacement, though he preferred changing them after each engagement. Most importantly, he documented that his rifle's accuracy didn't diminish in rain, while his fellow soldiers' weapons degraded significantly. But when he suggested others try his method, the mockery began immediately. The masculinity-obsessed culture of infantry units in 1944 couldn't process the image of combat soldiers putting condoms on rifles. It was absurd, unmilitary, and somehow vaguely shameful. Sergeant Mitchell had been particularly vocal. "The Army gives us weapons, Harper, not toys. You want to play games? Join the Navy." When Harper tried to explain the moisture protection benefits, Mitchell cut him off. "Your rifle working fine? Then shut up and soldier." The platoon lieutenant, Second Lieutenant James Crawford, a 22-year-old officer from Connecticut with exactly 6 weeks of combat experience, ordered Harper to remove the unauthorized modification during an inspection on October 28th. Harper complied during the inspection, then quietly resumed the practice afterward. Crawford either didn't notice or didn't care enough to enforce his order. By November 3rd, Harper had become a pariah in his own unit. Men avoided him in the chow line. No one wanted to share a foxhole with the pervert. Even soldiers who privately acknowledged their weapons were malfunctioning refused to try Harper's method, fearing the ridicule that would follow. But November 3rd would change everything. The German attack began at 0545 hours, preceded by a 15-minute artillery barrage that announced their intentions with brutal clarity. The 275th Infantry Division was attempting to recapture Hill 204, using the pre-dawn darkness and heavy rain to mask their approach. Company E, reduced to approximately 90 effectives from its authorized strength of 193, faced an assault by an estimated 300 German infantry supported by machine guns and mortars. The mathematics of the situation were grim. As German infantry emerged from the tree line 400 yards distant, American soldiers opened fire, and immediately disaster struck. Corporal James Davidson's M1 Garand jammed after the first shot, ice having formed in the gas tube overnight. Private Leonard Martinez pulled his trigger and heard only a click, moisture having degraded his primer. Sergeant Mitchell's rifle fired once. Then the bolt froze in the forward position, a malfunction caused by mud in the action. All along Company E's defensive line, rifles were failing. Some worked intermittently, others not at all. The rate of fire that should have torn the German assault apart instead sputtered like a dying engine. Men frantically cleared jams, cursed frozen actions, and discovered their weapons had been transformed into expensive clubs by the constant rain. Thomas Harper, positioned in a foxhole on the line's right flank, experienced none of these problems. His rifle, protected by its prophylactic cover, functioned perfectly. The barrel was dry, the action clean, the ammunition moisture-free due to his careful storage techniques. He acquired his first target at 0550 hours, a German NCO, identifiable by his distinctive helmet and the way other soldiers oriented toward him. Range approximately 420 yards. Harper's training from hunting groundhogs in West Virginia took over. Steady breath, smooth trigger press, follow-through. The rifle fired. The condom burst with a small pop, barely audible over the gunfire. The German NCO dropped like a puppet, with cut strings, shot through the upper chest. Harper calmly removed the destroyed prophylactic, rolled another one over his barrel, secured it, and acquired his next target. By 06:15 hours, 30 minutes into the engagement, Harper had fired 14 shots and achieved 14 hits. Every German soldier he aimed at went down. His rifle never jammed, never misfired, never failed to feed. While his fellow soldiers struggled with malfunctioning weapons, Harper worked with mechanical precision. The German assault, which should have overwhelmed the depleted American position through sheer numbers, instead stalled in confusion. The attackers couldn't understand why some positions fired effectively while others didn't. They couldn't identify the source of the devastating, accurate fire coming from Harper's position, and critically, they couldn't maintain command and control as Harper systematically eliminated every leader he could identify. If you're finding this story as fascinating as we are, make sure you're subscribed to the channel and hit that notification bell. We bring you the most incredible, untold stories from military history that you won't find anywhere else. Now, back to Harper's incredible day. By 0700 hours, the German attack had failed. Bodies littered the valley floor, and the survivors had withdrawn to their starting positions. Company E's commander, Captain Richard Morrison, conducted a hasty casualty assessment. American losses: 4 dead, 11 wounded, most injuries from German mortar fire rather than direct assault. German losses were catastrophic. Intelligence officers would later count 63 German bodies left in the valley, with an estimated additional 40 to 60 wounded who'd been dragged back during the withdrawal. The attack had cost the Germans at least 100 casualties, a devastating loss ratio. During the lull, Captain Morrison moved along his defensive line, assessing damage and redistributing ammunition. When he reached Harper's position, he found something extraordinary. While other positions showed evidence of weapon malfunctions, ammunition scattered everywhere as soldiers had desperately tried to clear jams. Harper's foxhole was pristine. His rifle lay across sandbags, barrel covered with a prophylactic. Empty brass was neatly stacked to one side, 16 cases total. Morrison, a pre-war regular Army officer who'd survived North Africa and Sicily, recognized Harper's firing position as professional-grade marksmanship setup. "Harper, how many rounds did you fire?" Morrison asked. 16, sir. "How many malfunctions?" "None, sir." Morrison looked at the condom-covered rifle, then at Harper, then back at the rifle. He'd heard the jokes about Harper's rubber rifle, had considered it unmilitary himself. But he was also looking at the only position in his entire company that had maintained sustained effective fire throughout the engagement. "That thing on your barrel, that's why your weapon worked?" "Yes, sir. Keeps moisture out. Bullet goes right through it." Morrison didn't respond immediately. He was calculating. If Harper's rifle hadn't failed while everyone else's had, and if Harper had achieved even a 50% hit rate with 16 shots, then Harper personally might have accounted for 8 German casualties. 8 out of 63 confirmed kills more than 12% of enemy losses from one soldier. That was statistically significant. How many do you think you hit, Harper? All of them, sir. I don't fire unless I have a clear shot. This claim, which would have sounded like boasting from anyone else, was delivered with such matter-of-fact confidence that Morrison believed it. He'd been watching through binoculars during the fight. He'd seen Germans drop with no apparent cause, had assumed they were taking cover. If those were all Harper's kills, then one private with a moisture-protected rifle had nearly single-handedly repelled a company-strength assault. You got more of those condoms, Harper? Yes, sir, full issue. I want you to demonstrate your technique to Sergeant Mitchell. That's an order. The demonstration occurred at 0730 hours. Harper showed Mitchell and 3 other soldiers exactly how he prepared his rifle. The process took less than 30 seconds. Stretch condom over barrel. Secure with rubber band. Check to ensure latex is tight and won't slip. Done. Mitchell, his pride wounded by earlier weapon failures, but his pragmatism intact, tried it on his own rifle. The transformation was immediate. His Garand, which had frozen up earlier, now had a dry barrel protected from the constant drizzle that continued falling. By 0800 hours, every soldier in Company E who had condoms was applying them to rifles. The prophylactics disappeared so quickly that Morrison sent a runner to battalion headquarters requesting emergency resupply, listing prophylactics waterproof, standard issue as urgent medical supplies needed immediately. The request caused confusion at battalion. Why did a rifle company in defensive positions need emergency condom resupply? The battalion surgeon, Captain David Steinberg, initially refused, thinking it was some kind of prank. Only when Morrison personally radioed and explained the application did Steinberg authorize release of the entire battalion medical supply, approximately 2,400 condoms. The German second attack came at 1430 hours, 3 hours after their first assault failed. This time, they committed a full battalion, approximately 450 infantry, supported by 2 Stu G3 assault guns and heavy mortar support. The Germans had observed the first attack's failure and concluded the Americans had reinforced the position. They responded with overwhelming force. What they didn't know was that they were about to face a company of Americans whose weapons now worked perfectly in conditions that had previously crippled them. The assault developed across a wider frontage this time, attempting to envelope both flanks of Company E's position. The German tactics were sound, their execution professional, their courage undeniable. But they were advancing across open ground against entrenched defenders whose rifles no longer failed. Harper, now positioned in a different location per Morrison's orders to prevent Germans from pinpointing his position, began engaging targets at 600 yards. This was extreme range for iron sights and required precise holdover and windage compensation. But Harper had grown up shooting groundhogs at similar distances, small targets that required exact precision. His first shot of this engagement struck a German machine gun team leader at 580 yards. The man dropped, and his crew's attempt to continue setting up their MG-42 was interrupted by Harper's second shot killing the gunner. The third member of the team grabbed the weapon and attempted to flee, covering approximately 30 yards before Harper's third shot ended his retreat. The pattern repeated across the battlefield. German soldiers advancing under fire from an entire American company whose weapons now functioned reliably were being picked off by Harper's methodical marksmanship, NCOs, machine gunners, anyone carrying radio equipment, officers identifiable by their distinctive gear. Harper prioritized targets based on their threat value, systematically dismantling German command structure. By 15:15 hours, Harper had fired 32 rounds in this engagement. His rifle had not malfunctioned once. The prophylactic covering his barrel had been replaced 4 times as bullets tore through the latex, but the barrel beneath remained pristine and dry. The German assault, despite superior numbers and fire support from the assault guns, collapsed by 15:45 hours. The combination of effective American rifle fire, artillery support called in by Morrison, and devastating losses among German leaders created chaos in the attacking force. They withdrew in disorder, leaving another massive casualty count in the valley. After the engagement, Morrison conducted a detailed after-action assessment. He interviewed every soldier, counted ammunition expenditure, and attempted to determine individual casualty contributions. The numbers he compiled would later be forwarded to division headquarters and eventually to the Army's training command. Company E had fired approximately 2,800 rounds during the second engagement. Weapon malfunction rate had dropped from the morning's estimated 40% to less than 5%. The prophylactic modification, now adopted by approximately 70% of the company, had transformed Company E from a unit crippled by equipment failure to a unit operating at near-peak effectiveness. Harper's individual performance was extraordinary. 32 rounds fired, 31 confirmed hits based on observed target drops and positions that could be correlated to his firing location. One round was recorded as a probable miss when a target Harper had engaged dropped behind cover and Harper couldn't confirm the hit. Adding his morning total, Harper had fired 48 rounds and achieved at least 47 confirmed hits. German prisoners captured during the second assault's aftermath provided intelligence that suggested Harper's actual kill count was higher. They reported that medical personnel had evacuated multiple casualties who died before reaching aid stations, and that Harper's long-range fire had killed several soldiers whose bodies were recovered by their units during the withdrawal. The most conservative estimate, based only on bodies American forces could physically observe, credited Harper with 48 confirmed kills. The actual number was likely higher, possibly as high as 53, based on German prisoner reports, but Harper himself insisted on the lower, verifiable number. 48 enemy soldiers killed by one man in one day represented an achievement that placed Harper among the top single-day performances by American riflemen in the European theater. For context, Sergeant Alvin York's famous World War I action that earned him the Medal of Honor involved killing approximately 25 German soldiers and capturing 132. But Harper's achievement was distinguished by something else: precision. York had used a mix of rifle and pistol fire during a chaotic close-quarters engagement. Harper had killed 48 men with 49 shots at ranges from 100 to 600 yards using iron sights in rain. His accuracy rate exceeded 98%. The prophylactic modification that had enabled this performance was the critical factor. Post-battle inspection of Harper's rifle showed zero internal moisture, no rust, no corrosion. His weapon's bore remained clean enough that he could have continued firing indefinitely. Meanwhile, rifles that hadn't used the modification showed visible moisture damage, rust formation, and bore degradation after just one day of exposure. November 4th brought a transformation in Company E's culture. The mockery ended immediately. Soldiers who'd ridiculed Harper 24 hours earlier now sought his advice. Men who'd refused to try his perverted modification were now desperately searching for prophylactics to protect their own weapons. Sergeant Mitchell, who'd been Harper's loudest critic, approached him during morning stand-to. "Harper, I was wrong. I apologize." This admission, from a veteran NCO to a private, demonstrated how completely the previous day had shattered preconceptions. Harper, characteristically, didn't gloat. "No problem, Sergeant. Just trying to keep my rifle working." The news of Harper's achievement spread through the 28th Infantry Division with remarkable speed. Battalion commanders visited Company E to observe the prophylactic modification. Division artillery officers came to interview Harper about his marksmanship techniques. Intelligence officers questioned him extensively about target selection and engagement decisions. Major General Norman Cota, commanding the 28th Division, personally visited Hill 204 on November 6th. The general, a no-nonsense regular Army officer who'd personally led troops off Omaha Beach on D-Day, initially seemed skeptical of the whole story. Combat reports were notorious for exaggeration. But Morrison presented evidence methodically. German casualty counts verified by burial details, Harper's ammunition expenditure records, witness statements from other soldiers, captured German intelligence reports that mentioned devastating, accurate fire from American positions. Kota interviewed Harper directly. "Son, I need to know if these reports are accurate. 48 confirmed kills in one day?" "Yes, sir. Might be more, but that's what we can confirm." "And you attribute your success to putting a rubber on your rifle barrel?" "Partially, sir. It kept my rifle working when others failed. But the marksmanship training I received from my grandfather and understanding ballistics from hunting, that was equally important." Kota appreciated the nuanced answer. Harper wasn't claiming the condom was magic. He was explaining it was one component of a system that included training, technique, and experience. This demonstrated military thinking that Kota valued. "General," Morrison interjected, "the modification has reduced our weapon malfunction rate by approximately 75%. Every rifle in my company is now using prophylactics for moisture protection. It's transformed our combat effectiveness." Kota made his decision immediately. "Captain, prepare a detailed report on the modification technique. I want photographs, step-by-step instructions, and performance data. I'm forwarding this to First Army with my personal recommendation for immediate adoption across all infantry units." The report Morrison submitted on November 8, 1944, became one of the most unusual documents in U.S. Army records. Titled Employment of Standard Issue Prophylactics as Rifle Barrel Moisture Protection, it included technical drawings, photographic evidence, statistical analysis of malfunction reduction, and combat effectiveness data from multiple engagements. Most remarkably, it included Morrison's calculation that the modification had a cost-benefit ratio that exceeded any other infantry equipment modification in Army history. Each condom cost approximately 5 cents. Each condom could protect a rifle worth $83 from moisture damage that would require armory-level repair. The return on investment was approximately 1,600 to 1. First Army Headquarters received Morrison's report on November 12th. The initial reaction was dismissive. Staff officers at that level were focused on the massive Siegfried Line offensive and preparations for crossing the Rhine. A company commander's report about putting condoms on rifles seemed trivial by comparison, but Major General Courtney Hodges, First Army commander, read the report personally. Hodges, a soldier's soldier who had risen from private to four-star general, recognized the significance immediately. If a 5-cent modification could reduce weapon malfunctions by 75%, that could save lives across his entire army. Hodges forwarded the report to Ordnance with a priority endorsement. Evaluate immediately for possible theater-wide implementation. Chop. This transformed what had been a curiosity into an urgent requirement. The Army Ordnance Department's testing facility at Liège, Belgium, received instructions on November 18th to verify Morrison's claims. Their test protocol was rigorous. They took 20 M1 Garand rifles and 20 M1903 Springfield rifles, divided them into control and test groups, and subjected them to moisture exposure equivalent to 72 hours in Hurtgen forest conditions. Results were conclusive. Rifles with prophylactic barrel protection showed 0 internal moisture, 0 rust formation, and maintained factory-level accuracy. Control group rifles showed significant moisture intrusion, visible rust on internal surfaces, and accuracy degradation averaging 34%. The Ordnance Report concluded, "The use of standard-issue prophylactic devices as rifle barrel moisture protection is highly effective, easily implemented, and recommended for immediate adoption across all infantry units operating in high-moisture environments. On December 2, 1944, First Army issued Technical Bulletin 374, Rifle Barrel Protection Using Standard-Issue Prophylactics. The bulletin included step-by-step instructions with photographs, recommended replacement intervals, and notes on application technique. More significantly, it credited Private First Class Thomas E. Harper of Company E, 2nd Battalion, 28th Infantry Division, as the originator of the technique. This was almost unprecedented. Army technical bulletins rarely credited individual soldiers, especially enlisted men. Make sure you stay subscribed, because we have more incredible stories, like this one coming soon. Hit that bell icon so you never miss an upload. The story continues with how this simple modification changed military doctrine forever. The bulletin's distribution triggered a massive demand for prophylactics across the European theater. By mid-December, supply officers were requisitioning condoms in quantities that alarmed medical personnel who assumed venereal disease rates had skyrocketed. The Quartermaster General's office received an emergency request in late December for 10 million additional prophylactics beyond normal medical allocations. The request specified for rifle barrel protection, not medical use, which caused considerable confusion until someone forwarded Technical Bulletin 374. Production of military specification condoms increased dramatically. Manufacturers who'd been producing approximately 2 million units monthly for military medical use were asked to increase production to 8 million monthly. The majority of this increase went directly to combat units for equipment protection rather than disease prevention. By January 1945, the modification had spread beyond First Army. British forces operating in similar conditions adopted the technique after observing American units. Canadian forces issued their own technical bulletin. Even French units integrated into Allied command began using the modification. The German military's intelligence service, the Abwehr, documented the American practice through prisoner interrogations and captured equipment. A German intelligence report from January 1945 noted with some confusion, American infantry units are employing prophylactic devices as rifle barrel protection. The modification appears widespread and effective in preventing moisture-related weapon malfunctions. German weapons designers actually considered copying the technique, but encountered an unexpected problem. German military condoms were manufactured to different specifications than American ones, slightly thicker and less elastic. Test firing showed that German condoms didn't burst cleanly when bullets passed through, instead partially fragmenting and creating potential barrel obstructions. The irony was profound. American condoms, mass-produced to the lowest acceptable cost using cheaper latex, were actually superior for this unintended application compared to the more expensive German versions. American industrial efficiency had accidentally created a better weapons maintenance tool. Harper's personal story took several remarkable turns. On December 15th, General Cota personally awarded him the Silver Star for his actions on November 3rd. The citation read, "Line dot, for gallantry in action against an armed enemy." Private First Class Harper demonstrated extraordinary marksmanship and initiative, accounting for 48 enemy casualties while maintaining his position under heavy fire. More significantly, Harper received orders transferring him to the 1st Army Scout Sniper School at Spa, Belgium, as an instructor. His expertise in long-range shooting and weapon maintenance made him valuable as a teacher rather than a line soldier. At the Scout Sniper School, Harper taught hundreds of soldiers the techniques that had made him so effective. His classes covered marksmanship fundamentals, ballistics, range estimation, and, crucially, weapon maintenance in adverse conditions. Every student left his course knowing how to apply prophylactic barrel protection. After the war, Harper returned to West Virginia and resumed his pre-war occupation as a hunting guide. He rarely spoke about his military service, and most people who knew him had no idea of his wartime achievements. A local newspaper discovered his story in 1963 and published a brief article titled "Local Man Was War Hero." The article brought unwanted attention. Veterans groups wanted him to speak. Historians wanted interviews. Harper declined most requests. When he did agree to be interviewed, he consistently downplayed his own role and emphasized the effectiveness of the barrel protection technique. In a 1974 interview with Army historians researching small unit actions in Europe, Harper said, "I just use common sense. Any hunter knows moisture ruins accuracy. I was surprised nobody else had thought of it. The rifle did the work. I just kept it clean." The prophylactic barrel protection technique remained in U.S. military doctrine long after World War II. During the Korean War, similar moisture conditions led to renewed emphasis on the technique. Vietnam-era manuals included instructions for tropical moisture protection using the same basic method. Modern military forces still use variations of Harper's innovation. Contemporary muzzle covers are essentially sophisticated prophylactics, designed specifically for firearms, but operating on identical principles. They protect barrels from moisture, debris, and environmental contamination while allowing bullets to pass through without impediment. The Marine Corps' official sniper manual, published in 2015, includes a section on muzzle protection that specifically credits WWII-era improvised techniques as the origin of current practices. While the manual uses modern materials, the underlying concept remains Harper's contribution. The broader military lesson extended beyond rifle maintenance. Harper's story demonstrated that innovation could come from anywhere, even from a private soldier who applied civilian expertise to military problems. This challenged the top-down innovation model that dominated military thinking. In 1958, the Army established the Harper Award for Combat Innovation, presented annually to soldiers who develop field-expedient solutions to tactical problems. The award specifically honors enlisted personnel, reflecting Harper's rank when he developed his modification. Recipients of the Harper Award over the decades include soldiers who improvised armor for vehicles, developed new communication techniques, created medical treatment protocols, and invented tactical procedures. All shared Harper's characteristic of seeing problems clearly and solving them practically. The statistical analysis of Harper's achievement provides insight into exceptional marksmanship. 48 confirmed kills with 49 shots represents accuracy that exceeds Olympic-level precision shooting under ideal conditions, accomplished instead during combat in terrible weather. Modern ballisticians analyzing Harper's documented shots note several factors that made his performance possible. First, his hunting background gave him thousands of hours of practice at estimating range and compensating for environmental factors. Second, his patience allowed him to wait for optimal shooting conditions rather than firing at marginal targets. Third, his weapon maintenance ensured consistent point of impact, but the critical factor was the barrel protection. Without the prophylactic modification, Harper's rifle would have experienced the same malfunctions that plagued his fellow soldiers. His marksmanship skill would have been irrelevant if his weapon didn't function. The modification was the enabling technology that allowed his expertise to be applied effectively. The German perspective on November 3rd provides additional context. Captured documents from the 275th Infantry Division described the engagement as catastrophic. The division's after-action report noted unexplained heavy casualties among command personnel and effective enemy fire despite weather conditions that should have degraded shooting accuracy. A German company commander who survived the second assault and was captured 3 weeks later during the Battle of the Bulge provided testimony during interrogation. "We expected the Americans' automatic weapons to jam in the rain. They always did before. But on that day, their fire never stopped. It was like they had found a way to make their rifles immune to weather. The psychological impact on German forces facing American units using the modification was significant. German soldiers had learned to time attacks during heavy rain or snow, knowing American weapons would malfunction. When this tactical advantage disappeared, German infantry lost an important edge. Intelligence reports from December 1944 showed German units specifically noting in patrol reports whether American positions were using the barrel protection technique. Or German tactical guidance advised avoiding assaults during precipitation if Americans were employing the modification, as the expected weapon malfunction advantage would not materialize. The broader technological lesson concerned the relationship between simple and complex solutions. The Army had investigated numerous complex approaches to moisture protection, including specialized coatings, elaborate cleaning procedures, and modified weapon designs. None had proven as effective as a 5-cent piece of latex rubber. This pattern repeated throughout military history. Sometimes the most effective solutions are the simplest. The prophylactic modification required no special tools, no technical training, no logistics infrastructure. Any soldier with a condom and a rubber band could implement it in 30 seconds. Harper's modification also demonstrated the importance of practical field experience. Army weapons designers working in laboratories and test ranges hadn't identified moisture intrusion as a critical problem because they couldn't replicate field conditions. Harper, actually fighting in those conditions, immediately recognized the issue and developed a working solution. The integration of civilian expertise into military problem-solving became a recognized force multiplier. Harper's hunting experience provided knowledge that military training didn't cover. The Army began actively recruiting soldiers with specific civilian skills and creating channels for field-expedient innovations to be rapidly evaluated and disseminated. By war's end, the condom rifle had become so commonplace that new soldiers arriving in Europe were taught the technique during in-theater orientation. It had evolved from mockery-inducing oddity to standard operating procedure in less than 8 months. The ultimate irony was that an item issued to prevent one kind of casualty ended up preventing another. Condoms distributed for disease prevention instead protected weapons, which protected soldiers, which reduced combat casualties. The unintended consequence was more valuable than the intended purpose. Harper's story also provided a case study in military culture and resistance to innovation. The initial mockery he faced revealed how social pressure could suppress potentially life-saving innovations. The fact that soldiers preferred risking weapon malfunction to social ridicule demonstrated the power of unit culture. But combat changed that culture rapidly. When mockery gave way to survival, adoption was immediate and complete. This pattern has repeated throughout military history. Good ideas are often rejected until circumstances make their value undeniable. Thomas Harper died in 1996 at age 74. His obituary in the Charleston Gazette mentioned his military service briefly, but didn't detail his achievements. Most readers had no idea the deceased had killed 48 enemy soldiers in one day or changed U.S. military doctrine. At his funeral, several fellow veterans from Company E attended. Sergeant Robert Mitchell, the man who'd first mocked Harper's rifle modification, delivered a eulogy. Tom Harper saved my life and the lives of my men by being smarter than the rest of us. He saw a problem, found a solution, and stuck with it, even when we ridiculed him. That's the definition of a soldier. The military honors at Harper's funeral included a 3-volley salute and the presentation of a folded flag to his widow. The 28th Infantry Division sent a representative who presented the division's colors to his family. Among Harper's effects, his family found his silver star, his discharge papers, and a small box containing several unused prophylactics from his original World War II issue. The rifle Harper used during his 48-kill day was eventually donated to the National Infantry Museum at Fort Benning, Georgia. It's displayed in a climate-controlled case with a placard explaining the prophylactic modification technique and Harper's achievement. A replica condom stretched over the barrel demonstrates the modification that changed military history. The museum's exhibit notes that Harper's innovation saved countless lives by reducing weapon malfunctions, improved combat effectiveness across the entire U.S. Army in Europe, and demonstrated the value of field innovation by individual soldiers. Visitors often photograph the display, amused by the unconventional solution, but impressed by its effectiveness. In 2012, the Army's Training and Doctrine Command published a study titled Innovation in Combat: Lessons from World War II. Harper's story featured prominently as an example of bottom-up innovation succeeding where top-down development had failed. The study noted that the Army had spent approximately $47,000 researching barrel protection solutions between 1942 and 1944. Harper's solution, which cost 5 cents and required 30 seconds to implement, outperformed all institutional research efforts. The study concluded that creating channels for soldier-driven innovation should be a priority. Modern Special Operations Forces still teach Harper's technique during specialized courses. Navy SEALs, Army Rangers, and Marine Raiders learn to use commercial condoms as emergency barrel protection during training that emphasizes improvisation and field-expedient solutions. The technique has expanded beyond rifles. Photographers use condoms to protect camera lenses in wet environments. Explorers use them to waterproof electronics. The military application that started with Harper has spawned numerous civilian adaptations, all based on the same principle. Latex rubber provides excellent moisture protection while remaining transparent and flexible. The story of Thomas Harper and his condom-protected rifle encapsulates several truths about warfare, innovation, and human nature. It demonstrates that expertise can come from unexpected places, that social pressure can suppress good ideas until circumstances force recognition, and that simple solutions often outperform complex ones. Most importantly, it shows that individual soldiers, thinking creatively and applying practical knowledge, can change the course of battles and influence military doctrine for generations. Harper's contribution wasn't a dramatic heroic charge or a suicide mission. It was simple, practical problem-solving applied under combat conditions. The 48 German soldiers who died facing Harper's rifle on November 3, 1944, were killed not just by superior marksmanship, but by superior innovation. They faced an enemy who'd solved a problem their own forces hadn't recognized, using a solution so simple it seemed absurd until combat proved its value. From mockery to military doctrine, from ridicule to recognition, from a 5-cent prophylactic to a technique that saved countless lives, Harper's story reminds us that innovation doesn't always come from laboratories or research facilities. Sometimes it comes from a farm boy from West Virginia who understood that keeping your rifle dry was the difference between living and dying. They mocked his condom on a rifle until it killed 48 Germans in one day and changed warfare forever.